I just wanted to discuss a letter that was sent to me by Gershon Solomon regarding the building of the Third Temple. Of course, the Jerusalem Post reported that the Temple Mount is not a trading chip for peace. This was written on August 25th, 2020 from the Jerusalem Post, Israel Madad. I want to just skip about halfway down in the article where it starts talking about Jared Kushner. It says, the president's senior advisor explained at a news conference on August 13th that in regard to the Temple Mount, the upcoming accord will counter radical extremism among Muslims who say that Al-Aqsa Mosque is under attack and that Muslims don't have access to it. At that event, President Donald Trump noted that the deal will allow much greater access to Muslims from throughout the world to peacefully pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a very special place for them. Speaking in a telephone briefing to the press a week later, Kushner said visiting Muslims could see that Al-Aqsa is not in danger, as anti-Semitic propaganda claims. And this is, of course, so ridiculous because it's the Jews that can't pray on the Temple Mount, not the Muslims. And, Christians and Jews are not to pray. Of course, there's never been any restrictions on Muslim tourism access to the site and to worship there. Turkish visitors and even one Saudi Arabian blogger entered the compound, although the latter was expelled by the Jerusalem Waqf, Islamic Religious Trust officials. Those are the ones run by King Abdullah II of Jordan. And unless there has been violence initiated by Muslims at the compound, very rarely have any of the local Muslim population been stopped from entering. But even without violence, Jews and Judaism are under attack there. Religious Jews are regularly described as either storming the site or breaking into it. Official Palestinian Authority propaganda denies any historic Jewish connection to the Temple Mount. Thus, the New Deal becomes a reinforcing agent, contributing to this negative viewing of Jewish rights at the Temple Mount. Already at the end of January, the deal of the century assured that all Muslims who come in peace may visit and pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque, and added that Jerusalem's other holy sites should remain open for peaceful worshipers of all faiths. Despite the imprecise language, the intention was clear. Only Muslims possess the right of free worship at the Temple Mount. True, if one bothers to read the small print of Trump's Peace Through Prosperity plan, one can discover that for Judaism, Jerusalem is where Mount Moriah is located. The Temple Mount itself is the holiest site in Judaism. And of course it would be for Christians too, because that's where Jesus died, was buried, and resurrected the third day. Now this is going to play into what I spoke about before about figuring out that the phrase, he who now letteth will let, means a lease. It means to hand over possession of some land for the purpose of somebody being able to use it. And that's what I believe the Daniel covenant is going to be. And it's going to be a lease. And it's going to be leased by occupiers who have occupied God's mountain for a long time and had it in their possession. Because that's what the word restrain means beyond what you've learned in the past. This is something the Lord revealed to me. So this article goes on to say, people of every faith should be permitted to pray on the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, in a manner that is fully respectful to their religion. But it appears those were just words. Why would any other religion want to come there and worship? You're going to have all of these foreign pagan gods come there and worship? That's not what God wants. Indeed, taking a cue from the Jerusalem Post Torah Lazarov, who asked in these pages on Friday, can the Temple Mount be a trading card to entice the Saudis? Could we imagine a future peace treaty with that kingdom in which Mecca would be open for Jews? Not at all. As travel guides inform us, the authorities strongly enforce the strict prohibition against non-Muslims even entering the city. Could we see limited archaeological excavations be undertaken at the Temple Mount if not Jewish prayer? No, we could not. There is a secular, holy, and sanctified status quo in place whereby, in the words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on October 24, 2015, Israel will continue to enforce its long-standing policy: Muslims pray on the Temple Mount, non-Muslims visit the Temple Mount. So the Muslims are occupying God's holy mountain, Mount Moriah, and possessing it by the Hashemite kingdom, the kingdom of Jordan. It goes on to say, in other parts of the world, policies of status quo have been altered. In Turkey, the Hagia Sophia Church has been reverted to a mosque. Calls by the Greek government advocating for the preservation of the status quo has received no backing from other countries. All that U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said on July 1st was that America, quote, views a change in the status of the Hagia Sophia as diminishing the legacy of this remarkable building. Hello, it used to be the most grand church where the relics of the Lord were kept until the Muslims invaded and conquered Constantinople. The Hagia Sophia Church was where the relics of Jesus, Yeshua, and his disciples were kept for long periods of time before the Muslims invaded and conquered it and took it over. And then the invaders took the relics. Now, during the Crusades, some of these countries that came were trying to save relics from it, and now it's, it had these beautiful paintings of the Lord, and the Muslims came in and painted over it. And of course, centuries later, when it became a museum, they cleaned up the ceiling and they unearthed the paintings that were painted over by the Muslims, and there were pictures of Jesus and his disciples on the ceiling and other places in that church. But now the Turkish leader has taken it over as a mosque again. And there wasn't one word of any opposition to this takeover, except by the Greek Orthodox. The article goes on to say, in India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi laid a foundation stone for a Hindu temple in Ayodhya to replace a mosque that had been built there in the 17th century with no foreign outcry. It is not true that in Jerusalem the status quo has remained unchanged since 1967. Not only has Israel chosen not to correct the situation and create a new status quo, but it permitted the Muslim side to improve its versions of that status quo. In 1994, Israel's peace treaty with Jordan provided for freedom of access to places of religious and historical significance and validating interfaith relations, religious understanding, freedom of religious worship, and tolerance. Yet at the same time, high priority was granted to Jordan's historic role in Muslim shrines in Jerusalem. Israel was silent when the 2013 agreement signed between Jordan's King Abdullah II and Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority actually enlarged the 1967 status quo in that it sacralizes concepts such as environs and Waqf properties, which strictly speaking are outside the compound. On August 17th, Kushner declared that Israel's deal with the UAE had largely solved the volatile issue of the status of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Leaving the status quo in place is not a solution. Now listen to this. One alternative is to assign a closed-in space within the site that is sufficiently distant and even invisible as a Jewish prayer location. That could be the Golden Gate, a small storeroom just to the north of it, or to enclose an area just to the north of the main entry gate near the western wall within the colonnaded walkway. A second alternative would be to provide 2 separate time slots for prayer, as at the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron. Muslims should not be allowed to make an unequal and discriminatory claim in Jerusalem. That says Jews have no rights. At their foremost religious site, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a claim they demand and assert for themselves. And I don't know if you saw in the news that there's hundreds of Israelis that are protesting Benjamin Netanyahu. Now I'm going to read a little bit of this article from honestreporting.com. It says, what the West Bank is and is not. The West Bank, including eastern Jerusalem, refers to 2,173 square miles of mostly mountainous land running right down the middle of Israel from south of the Galilee to the northern part of the Dead Sea region, north and south of Jerusalem, sitting on the western bank of the Jordan River, hence its name. There are numerous problems with this demand being made of Israel by the international community. The first relates to the use of the word occupied. From a legal perspective, Israel took control over this land during the Six-Day War, a war of self-defense in June of 1967, when the armies of all neighboring Arab countries ganged up to attack and destroy Israel. Jordan had control of the West Bank, but when King Hussein's forces joined the attack on the Jewish state, the IDF chased them out of the area. No Jordanian forces remained on the western bank of the Jordan River. To qualify as occupied territory, a country needs to conquer an area which another country had sovereign rights to. But Jordan never had sovereign control over the West Bank. The United Nations had proposed giving the region to the Arab state that was to be established alongside a Jewish state as part of the 1947 partition plan. Jordan took control of the area during the all-out Arab assault on Israel after Israeli independence was declared in May of 1948. But when Jordan annexed or took sovereignty the territory in 1950, the international community refused to accept Jordan as having rights to the West Bank. Therefore, Israel taking control of the West Bank from the Jordan cannot be called an occupation. Putting aside the question regarding the term occupied, from a legal perspective, the terminology is misleading as it rejects the historical Jewish claim to the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem. In Jewish history, this region was known as Judea and Samaria and was an essential part of the Jewish capital. So right there in that article, it talks about giving the Jews a little secluded space on the Temple Mount where they can pray. Now, I believe, he who now letteth will let. That's the lease. It's a lease of possession, giving somebody possession of land that you're leasing so that they can build a temple on it and perform their service on it. Now you have to go back and look at my last 3 videos because they all go together and explain what I was saying about 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, about the revealing of the man of sin. Let's look at what the Wikipedia says about the Kingdom of Jordan. It says, what is now Jordan has been inhabited by humans since the Paleolithic period. Three stable kingdoms emerged there at the end of the Bronze Age: Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Later rulers included the Nabatean Kingdom, the Roman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. After the Great Arab Revolt against the Ottomans in 1916, during World War I, the Ottoman Empire was partitioned by Britain and France. The Emirate of Transjordan was established in 1921 by the Hashemite, then Emir or Prince Abdullah I, and the Emirate became a British protectorate. In 1946, Jordan became an independent state, officially known as the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan, but was renamed in 1949 to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan after the country captured the West Bank during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and annexed it. They took sovereignty over it until it was lost to Israel in 1967. Jordan renounced its claim to the territory in 1988 and became one of two Arab states to sign a peace treaty with Israel in 1994. Jordan is a founding member of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The sovereign state is a constitutional monarchy, but the king holds wide executive and legislative powers. So let's look at the Jerusalem Islamic Waqf. Now, a friend of mine just sent this to me, and of course I had been researching about King Abdullah II in my videos, and she sent this from the Wikipedia. Elaine, thank you. And it says the Jerusalem Islamic Waqf is an Islamic religious trust, sometimes called an Islamic religious endowments organization, best known for controlling and managing the current Islamic edifices on and around the Temple Mount in the old city of Jerusalem, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. Some form or another of the Waqf has governed access to the Haram esh-Sharif since the Muslim reconquest of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1186, with the latest version instituted by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan after its conquest of the West Bank and East Jerusalem during the 1948 war. So basically the article is telling you something very important there, that the occupiers of Islam have been there from the year 1187 in some form or another, taking occupation and possessing God's holy Mount Moriah for that long. Can you believe that? It goes on to say, accordingly, the King of Jordan currently supplies all the funding needed to operate the Waqf, which is in effect the civil administration for the holy site. Israel conquered the holy city of Jerusalem during the Six-Day War of June of 1967. After the end of the hostilities, Israel allowed the Waqf to retain authority over the Temple Mount. Okay, so I was going to share with you Gershon Solomon of the Temple Mount Faithful's current letter in response to Jared Kushner's suggestion to invite all the Muslims of the world to come to God's holy mountain and worship there. He actually stated that this was a great sin that Israel did in the 67 war when they conquered the Temple Mount, had it in their possession, and then Moshe Dayan, the general of Israel's army, handed it back to the custodianship of the Waqf and the Islamic forces, which after all of those centuries of the land being occupied, God's holy mountain Moriah, they handed it back to the Muslim occupiers. Now remember, I was revealing to you that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where it has the words in verse 7, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now restrains will continue until he's taken out of the way. That word restrains right there actually means occupy and possession. That's what I was trying to tell you in my last videos. So it would actually read, if you put those words in the place of restrains, but the one who now occupies or possesses the land will continue until he's taken out of the way, and then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will slay with the breath of his mouth and annihilate by the majesty of his coming. It automatically was on another version other than King James. Sorry, I usually read King James, but I think that must have been the Berean Study Bible version. And of course, I revealed that letteth and let means leasing a piece of land to give somebody else possession of it for their use. And at one point, this Antichrist is going to lease the land, sign this covenant of Daniel for 7 years, lease the land to Israel to build their holy temple, so they have a little space on the Temple Mount where they can worship and pray and do their sacrifices. Then halfway through, the Antichrist is going to break the lease, and that will stop the sacrifice and offering or oblation to God. When he breaks the lease, they will take possession of the land back and claim sovereignty over it. And likely, in my mind, based on everything that's happening, turn it into a mosque. And this Antichrist will put his image inside that temple. Now, China is trying to get inroads, China the dragon, and they are also leasing property from Israel and other surrounding countries. So they're trying to lease land there and gain access to it to use it for whatever they want. Now, what if they somehow get possession of the Temple Mount area or a piece of it, and the people occupying are removed and then he takes over? So I don't really know what's going to happen with that. So these are just a few thoughts of mine about it. That the Lord's been just kind of revealing all of this at this particular period of time. The article in Wikipedia goes on to say the Waqf administration is headed by a director, for sometimes Director General, who runs the civil administration for the holy sites. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem is in charge of Islamic religious affairs at the site. The Supreme Muslim Council is the Islamic judicial body governing affairs under Islamic law within Israel. The Palestinian Authority has parallel organizations claiming interest in these same matters, i.e. the Ministry of Islamic Waqf at the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian Authority Grand Mufti, or the Palestinian Supreme Fatwa Council. And those are not to be confused with those recognized by Israel, even if some of the same people hold both offices. The Hashemite custodianship of Jerusalem holy sites is another Wikipedia article, refers to Jordan's royal family role in tending Muslim and Christian holy sites in the city of Jerusalem. The legacy traces back to 1924, when the Supreme Muslim Council, the highest Muslim body in charge of Muslim community affairs in mandatory Palestine, accepted Hussein bin Ali, Sharif of Mecca, as custodian of Al-Aqsa. The custodianship became a Hashemite legacy administered by consecutive Jordanian kings. Jordan controlled East Jerusalem and the West Bank in 1948 and basically took sovereignty, the territories, in 1951 until they were lost to Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. Jordan renounced claims to the territory in 1988 and signed a peace treaty with Israel in 1994, whose 9th article states that Israel commits to respect the present special role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in Muslim holy shrines in Jerusalem, and that when negotiations on the permanent status will take place, Israel will give high priority to the Jordanian historic role in these shrines. In 2013, an agreement between Jordan and the Palestinian Authority recognized Jordan's role. Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock were renovated 4 times by the Hashemite dynasty during the 20th century. In 2016, King Abdullah II participated in funding renovations of Christ's tomb in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and in 2017, Abdullah donated $1.4 million to the Jerusalem Islamic Waqf, the Jordanian authority responsible for administrating Al-Aqsa. An independent report estimates the total amount that the Hashemites have spent since 1924 on administrating and renovating Al-Aqsa is over $1 billion. Intermittent violence at the Temple Mount between the Israel Defense Forces and the Palestinians evolves into diplomatic disputes between Israel and Jordan. If you saw how much territory, land, and ports that China was getting a hold of worldwide, you would be completely astonished, and it's kind of frightening, actually. They're coming and taking farmland, leasing the farmland from these other countries, and they're letting them do it in all these countries. In South America, many of the South American countries have given land to China. And of course in the U.S., they have land, and they were buying up property in the Bay Area. But as I told you, the footsteps of the dragon are right on the doorstep of Israel. And actually, they are working with Jordan, with property within Jordan, and it's not far-fetched to think that somehow they're going to play a role in the lease in the future, with Jordan perhaps. I don't know yet, but that would put the dragon right there in God's holy hill, the holy mountain that Daniel the prophet prayed for when he was in Babylon, holy Mount Moriah. Now, in case you don't know who Gershon Solomon is, he was one of the soldiers in Israel that helped to get back the Holy Temple Mount, Holy Mount Moriah, back into Israel's possession. He was a soldier, and he had this big story that he told about how he was run over by a tank by the Syrian army, I believe it was, and he heard God's voice saying to him that he wasn't finished with him yet, but he saw this light, this bright light surrounding him. And anyway, his life was saved. I think that he saw angels, or there was some really amazing story that he told. But he's also the one that caused huge controversy in the 1990s when he tried to lay an anointed cornerstone that was a naturally cut stone as the foundation stone of the third temple. And then there were Arab riots and Palestinian riots that ensued after that. So now Gershon is considered somewhat of an extremist, but he has this foundation, the Temple Mount Faithful, and he's tried to raise money for building the third temple. So he's very involved in that. And then he do marches to proclaim Israel's sovereignty over Holy Mount Moriah. And he marches from the tomb of the Maccabees to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount area. And I actually had the privilege of meeting him when he came to the United States, and he had the most loving look in his eyes. I just was so amazed. I felt the Spirit of God was just working, causing me to meet him, and I just thought it was very neat. And he also let me use pictures in my book of the second temple so that I would have pictures preparing the way for the third temple that they're planning on building. So Gershon just sent out this newsletter, a newsletter to lovers of Zion and Israel in the world. So I wanted to share this. The advisor of President Trump, Jared Kushner, Islamicizes the Holy Jewish Temple Mount and declares, quote, "The question of the Temple Mount is solved. The agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates will open the door for millions of Muslims from the entire world to come to the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem and worship there," end quote. The Temple Mount faithful in Israel never ever, how dare you make the Holy Temple Mount, Holy Mount Moriah, of God and the people of Israel an international Islamic site. Talk about occupation, continuing on. On August 18th, 2020, the chief advisor of President Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, stated to journalists in Washington, "The question of the Temple Mount is solved. According to the deal of the century, the agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates will open the door for millions of Muslims from the entire world to come to the Holy Temple Mount and worship there." The Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful movement sent an open letter declaration to Jared Kushner and to President Donald Trump in the name of the God and people of Israel and the Faithful movement. Quote, "Your words will never come to pass. How dare you Islamicize and convert the holy hill of the Temple Mount, the holy mountain of the God of Israel, where he chose to dwell among his people Israel and to put his name forever. The location of the first and second and third temples soon to be built, as you have stated, to a mosque that will become open after the agreement with the Arab Emirates to millions of Muslims from the entire world. The meaning of your statement is that the Holy Jewish Temple Mount will become just an Islamic site, no longer the site of the Holy Jewish Temple. More than this, Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the God and people of Israel, will become flooded by millions and millions of Muslims, and the Holy Land of Israel, the land of the Bible, and the kingdom of Israel will be covered by tens of millions of Muslims. Can you say the war of Gog and Magog? Wow. The clear meaning of this is the dream of the Islamic world that they have never given up to eliminate Israel from the map of the world and will come to pass. Mr. Kushner, how dare you and how do you have the chutzpah, primarily as a Jew, to take the place of the God of Israel to cancel and change his word and his promise to Israel? How dare you make the Holy Temple Mount, where the God of Israel chose to dwell among his people Israel, an Islamic site? Who gave you the permission and the authority to do this anti-godly and anti-Israel evil act? Along the passage of history, countless foreigners tried to destroy the Holy Temple and the Holy Temple Mount and make it a foreign site. All of them disappeared from the stage of history, and so it will be with your shameful and evil plan. Soon, very soon, it will be thrown into the garbage bin of history forever. The Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful movement declares very clearly, this problem of the Holy Temple Mount will be solved only when the Islamic abomination and desecration is stopped. The Islamic pagan and foreign presence on the Holy Temple Mount is removed by the government of Israel and taken back to Mecca, and the long Arab Islamic occupation of the Holy Temple Mount is ended forever. So there you have the word restrain, to occupy, to possess the land. And he who leases the land will lease it till he's taken out of the way and the lawless one is revealed. the son of perdition. All the many foreigners that occupied the Temple Mount and placed their shrines on the holy Jewish Temple Mount were removed from the holy mountain of God of Israel and were harshly judged by God in history. The Islamic Arab foreign occupation of the Temple Mount is illegal. There is only one solution to the problem of the Holy Temple Mount, the rebuilding of the Holy Temple of the God of Israel, the third Holy Temple, immediately, with no delay, in our lifetime. It will be the pinnacle, the climax, in the completion of the major redemption that Israel will experience during those great days and times, exactly as the God of Israel prophesied for the end times, the time that Israel will very soon experience. And then he gives the scriptures. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people shall go and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For from Zion shall go forth Torah, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall decide for many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war any more. But they shall sit every man under his vine, and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. Isaiah 2:2-4, and Micah 4:1-4. The Temple Mountain Land of Israel Faithful Movement is calling Mr. Jared Kushner to immediately cancel his negative plans for the Holy Temple Mount, to apologize before God and Israel, and to adopt only the plan of the God of Israel as it appears in these profound words of Isaiah and Micah. The Temple Mountain Land of Israel Faithful Movement will continue intensively with her campaign and work, and will not rest day or night until the plan of the God of Israel will come to pass immediately in our lifetime. In the Almighty God of Israel we trust. And then, of course, they ask for sponsorship of their foundation. So I just wanted to read that letter because in some of the history of the occupation of the Islamic forces on the holy mountain of God, and I do believe that that's what it means when it says, he who now restrains will do so till he's taken out of the way. Because it means he who occupies, he who possesses, and that means the land, God's holy mountain, which is what Daniel prayed for in Babylon. He prayed for God's holy hill, and the angel came and showed him what would happen in the last days to Jerusalem and God's holy Mount Moriah. And the angel said, seal up the book till the time of the end. Obviously, we're in the time of the end since this is being revealed right now. And I pray everyone will open their eyes to see this truth of the meanings in these words. I'm not making it up. It's not my opinion. It's actual, factual information that the Lord has shown me that is truthful. And remember, if you come on here and you criticize something you disagree with, and then you go bad-mouthing me all over the place, or you put some bad-mouthing comment down below, all it does is try to sabotage my website, which I've worked very hard to try to have a ministry for the Lord. So I think these are some of the things and ways in which people just recently attacked me, and they should think twice before trying to sabotage somebody who really has a heart for God and His Holy Spirit and the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, who I love with all my heart. So I just pray for God to expand the testimony He gave me worldwide. It already is going to countries in Europe and Africa and Ireland, and it's in New Zealand, Australia, all over the place. France. I haven't heard from my friend from France in a long time. But it's in Germany. It's in the Netherlands. It's in Panama. I just pray that it will continue to expand. And without me doing a single thing, the Lord had my book picked up by a Judaica endowment at Harvard University, and they put it in their library. And this endowment was established in around the 1928, 1929 through 30 period of time. That's when my grandmother graduated from college, and 1930. So that was kind of neat. I didn't do anything to put that book in a Judaica endowment. Just research what I'm telling you, and you will see that I'm telling you the truth. And that's all I want to say. I just hope this channel is a blessing. Many of you have told me that it is, and that my book was astonishing. That's because they're true divine revelations in it from the Holy Spirit. And anyone who's coming on here on a Christian channel telling you don't read somebody's book, don't buy their book, they're just sabotaging God's work. Don't listen to it, because I'm not out here just trying to make money on my book. I spent 7 years writing what the Lord was showing me, with an 8th year editing it. And it is an incredible testimony of the Lord for the last days. And don't judge it. Read it. And then you'll see. God is on the move, and He's at work. Thank you for all of the loving people who leave loving comments towards me. I appreciate you so much. Shalom, and put this video with the last 3 videos, and all of the pieces are coming together. God bless everybody. That's it for now. Till I talk to you later. Shalom.